When I was younger, my family and I went on a road trip to Wyoming to see Yellowstone National Park. It's a beautiful place, and if you haven't seen it yet, I really recommend it. Anyways, so from our home in California, it was about a 17-hour drive in our Yukon XL. It took us several days worth of on and off driving to get there, and during the nights, we would try to find a little motel to rest at. One of the nights, due to us being behind schedule, my dad attempted to drive through the night to get us there sooner. He made it probably into a few hours of the night before he deemed it unsafe and parked us in this little unlit rest stop in the middle of the woods in some flyover state. My brothers and I had already fallen asleep in the car several hours before he'd stopped, so at least for a couple of hours, we were all sleeping in the car in this dark, little parking lot surrounded by nothing but forest. Having got only a couple hours of sleep and being in a pretty uncomfortable position, I woke up in the middle of the night, pretty disoriented but not really scared. I looked around and saw everyone fast asleep in this pitch black car, and naturally, I felt pretty alone. I tried to fall back asleep, but it just wasn't working out, so I just sat there for a while, boredom setting in, looking out the window to see where we were. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see jack shit. Luckily, I wasn't the type to pack little, and had brought a couple of flashlights in my bag. Being careful not to disturb my sleeping family, I reached into the back seat, unzipped my bag, and pulled out a little plastic yellow flashlight. It wasn't the brightest, but it was enough to see the foreground of the general surroundings. I put it up to the glass, making sure not to make any noise, and pushed the little switch on it to the on position. I pressed my face against the glass and looked out. At first, it looked like a normal tree line with some bushes, trees, and whatever. But as I scanned the darkness looking for animals, buildings, etc., I noticed this dark shape standing between these two trees in the distance. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't moving, just standing there. After watching it for a good while and seeing no real signs of movement, I just assumed it was a bush or some kind of natural occurrence like that. Just as I was about to turn the light off and reattempt sleep, I saw this shadow shape turn 90 degrees and move behind a tree, disappearing from sight. This scared the shit out of me, and I immediately turned off the flashlight and threw my sweater-turned blanket over my head, shut my eyes tightly, and covered my ears. I was paralyzed with fear, and too full of adrenaline to get any sleep. Sat in this semi-fetal position, clutching my flashlight for the rest of the night. I waited until the sun came up and we were back on the road before I got any sleep. I didn't tell anyone about the man I saw in the woods though, and I don't know who that was, and that freaked me out. It's actually been really hard getting this story to tell. For a long time, reading true scary stories online and listening to them on YouTube, I often wondered why anyone would tell the story of something tragic that happened to them that others would look at as entertainment. But finally, I decided to tell the story because I realized it's not just about entertainment, it's also a way of helping people who might find themselves in similar situations. This story is more of like a hitchhike story, but it started all from the road trip we were taking. Anyway, my story took place about 10 years ago. My friend Jake and I grew up together. We were best friends for as long as I can remember. We always sat by each other at school. We hanged out during recess. We played video games together. And overall, we're just very, very close. We even decided to go to the same college together. I thought Jake could have gotten into a much better school than me, but like me, he just wanted to have the experience together. When the time came for us to leave for college, we left a few days before and planned it as a road trip. We gave ourselves 3 days worth of driving to get there. Now neither Jake nor me had ever driven that long, so it was quite an adventure for us. We thought it would be cool to see some of the countryside before having to buckle down and study. The second day we were driving through the mountains. It was a new experience too because I'd never done it. I think I felt sick a lot of the time, and it likely had to do with the elevation. However, towards the end of the day, something went wrong with the car. I was driving and it suddenly seized up. I had trouble even getting it off the road. This was strange. Jake and I couldn't really figure out what to do with the car. It was beyond our expertise. We were also in a bad area because our cell phones had very less signals. We didn't know how far away we were from the gas station either. So we decided that one of us would hitchhike to a gas station and get some help. All of our belongings were in the car, so one of us would have to stay back and the other would have to go. Jake decided that he would be the one to go and get help. It took a while before a car picked him up, and by that point there wasn't much sunlight left. So I just sat in the driver's seat and waited. The sun went down at this point. A state trooper at one point pulled up and parked behind me, and I had a little chat with him. I let him know what was going on and that my friend had hitched a ride to try and get help. He took some information and said he would drive to the gas station to see if my friend had gotten there or not. Apparently, about 30 miles away, there was a gas station with a garage, and they said that they could get our car towed for us. The officer asked how long I had been waiting, and I let him know that at that point, it had been over 3 hours. The officer said that, according to him, this was enough time for my friend to come back and go 3 times over and over again. When the officer left, I was actually concerned. When the officer was gone for a long time, I was more concerned. It was dark out, and for the first time, I truly felt alone. It was an odd and pleasant feeling, but I also didn't want the officer to come back because somehow I knew that it would be bad news. It was nearly 2 hours later that the officer came back. He had 2 trucks with him, and I was relieved. I was sure that Jake wasn't one of them. However, when the officer came to my car, Jake wasn't with him. He informed me that no one had stopped at the gas station to get a tow. He also checked to see if anyone had seen the car with Jake in it. No one was able to pull it up from memory. No one was able to ever find him. The car was towed while it was being worked on. I had to go to the police station and file a report. They had to call Jake's parents and let them know that he was missing. I got a motel room in the area. I put off the trip because I was worried about my friend. I spent 4 days in that motel, freaked out and worried I was never going to see him again. Finally, the police came to talk to me. The car that Jake had gotten a ride in was found at a grocery store parking lot. Jake was in the trunk. He was naked, beaten, bloody, and unconscious. He was still alive, but he was in a coma for about a month. And then finally he gained his consciousness, and even after that, it was months before he was able to recognize any of us, or what the situation was. I don't want to go into much detail, but the people that picked him up had stolen the car that they were driving. They robbed him off his money and credit cards and cell phones. It was actually due to the credit cards that they were eventually caught. There were 2 men, and one of them is still in jail. I didn't go to college that year, but I'm happy to tell you that the following autumn, Jake and I finally made it to college together. This time, however, we flew and his parents came with us. We spent all 4 years roomed together and still are best friends to this day. Hitchhiking for any reason is really bad. If Jake and I had waited, the officer would have eventually come upon us and my friend would have never been found. This happened back when I was a teenager. My best friend had turned 16 and his parents went and bought a car for him. Well, once that happened, we were always driving somewhere. I mean, if you had a car around when you were his age, you'd understand what I mean. Once you get a taste of that sort of freedom, it's like a drug and you take it all the time. So this happened on a weekend night. We had gone and grabbed a bite to eat. Neither of us really felt like going home. We lived in a suburban area and weren't really supposed to drive too far away. We also were not supposed to drive on the freeway either. However, we were bored teenagers and we figured that there was no way our parents would figure out that we had done something they told us not to do. So we got on the freeway and thought we'd take it to the city. Our inexperience caused us to make a very big mistake though. We drove into the city on the interstate. We spent a little bit of time there, and on the way back, Unbeknownst to us at the time, we got on the wrong interstate. We kept expecting to get back to the area we lived in, but the further and further we drove, we came to the conclusion that we must have gotten on the wrong road. After discussing it a little bit, we decided to take the next exit to try and find a gas station or something to ask for directions back to the right area. So without thinking to look and see if there was a sign for a gas station at the next exit, we took the exit. There were no businesses right at the exit, but we didn't want to go back to the interstate, so we drove down the road trying to find some place. I can't tell you how long we were driving down the road, because it was long. We came across a few houses here and there. There were some stores and small diners here and there as well, but it was late and they were all closed. Now the both of us started to panic, not really sure what we needed to do. We eventually decided that the best thing to do would just be to turn around, drive back to the interstate, find an exit with a gas station, and hope that we made it without running out of gas. So we turned on the next road, which was very thin. We figured we would get to the driveway and then turn around at that. I tried to tell my friend just to pull out of the road, but he didn't want to do that. So our situation, which was bad in the beginning and kept getting worse, had gotten worse again. The road was dark, thin, and didn't appear to have any driveways on it. We were both tense and scared. It was then that we saw something up ahead us. There were two guys walking towards us on the side of the road. We thought this would be good, and we would be able to ask them for help and directions. However, they froze when they saw us, and after a moment ran off the road into the woods. We were really confused, but thought there could be many reasons for this, so we just kept driving. We very soon saw an old pickup truck laying in a ditch on the side of the road. We drove by it, and when I saw it, I felt my chest tighten up a bit. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. However, the person was not moving and their head was lolled back. There looked to be blood on the door of the truck. We passed and eventually came to a driveway. We used it to turn around and drive back. When the truck on the side of the road came into view, we noticed that the two men who had run into the woods were at the truck. They saw us once again, but this time they ran off a lot quicker. When we drove up to the truck, it was much more obvious this time that whoever was in the driver's seat was dead. This time, the truck was on my friend's side of the car. When he noticed it, he just hit the gas and drove as quickly as he could. We got off the road, took the name of the road, and drove back to the interstate. The next exit had a gas station. We went there and asked the attendant to call the police. The police had to call our parents, and we got chewed out big time for having driven so far away. And the man in the truck was indeed dead, and it wasn't in a car wreck. He was stabbed several times in the chest, and we had no doubt that the men who killed him were the two guys that twice ran away from us into the woods when they saw us coming. Even though the guys fled both times, it was still terrifying to think that they were so close to us on that thin, poorly lit road. We also wondered if they lived in the driveway we came across, but we don't know. All we know is that a wrong turn can lead you to somewhere you really never want to go.